Before we begin, ask yourself, would you dare dig a hole in your backyard if something was calling from below? Tonight's story will drag you beneath the surface, into a place no light touches and no soul returns from. If you love terrifying true-style stories, mysterious discoveries, and things that should have stayed buried, hit subscribe, tap that like, and tell me in the comments, would you go down that hole? This is Abir's Stories, and this is your nightmare tonight.
I was 13 when my parents moved us into the new house. It was one of those cookie-cutter neighborhoods, manicured lawns and trees that looked like they'd been planted by the same person. The house was fine, not much different from the old one, really, but the backyard, that was my kingdom. I was obsessed with digging back then. I used to make these huge pits at the beach, cover them with towels, and pretend they were forts. I guess I felt safe down there, surrounded by dirt, away from everything else. So when my stepdad told me I could dig in the backyard, I couldn't believe it. He even gave me a pointed metal shovel. But he had rules. Don't go deeper than 4 feet. It could collapse. It could hit an underground pipe or cable or something. I nodded. I heard him, but I wasn't listening. I started digging on Friday night, right after dinner. The soil was soft, easy to cut through, and by the time the sky turned purple and my mom called me in for bed, I had a 3-foot-deep, grave-sized hole. But that wasn't enough. I wanted more. So I made a plan. I'd dig deeper, maybe 6, 8 feet, but I'd hide it. I figured I could use some old planks from the garage to make a false bottom at 3 feet. That way, if my stepdad checked, he'd think I followed the rules. Saturday morning came, and by noon, I doubled the depth of the hole. I had to start dumping the extra dirt in the woods behind our yard so my stepdad wouldn't notice. He had no reason to. I was careful, kept the boards over the hole when I wasn't in it. That afternoon, I hit something. Not hard enough to stop me, but enough to make me pause. The shovel scraped against something solid. At first, I thought it was a rock, but it glinted in the sunlight when I brushed the dirt off it. It wasn't a rock. It was gold, the size of a soccer ball, buried deep in the earth. I rubbed the top of it and realized it wasn't gold, but some kind of brass or copper. I tried to move it, but it wouldn't budge. I wanted to get a topside, but knew I'd have to lie to my stepdad about how far down it was, so I kept my discovery hushed when my mom called me in for dinner. All through dinner, I kept thinking about it. What was it? Some kind of treasure? I wanted to figure it out on my own, so I asked if I could sleep outside in the fort that night, but they shut that down fast. They were worried the hole would collapse on me in the dark, or that it would get too cold. After dinner, I went back out. The backyard was quiet, just the sounds of the woods in the distance. I pulled up the boards, climbed down, and started digging around the orb, trying to loosen it. The more I dug, the more I realized it wasn't just an orb. It was connected to something below. I dug around it, my hands shaking, scraping away at the earth. The shape became clearer. The orb wasn't just sitting there, it was part of a structure, like a roof with shingles buried in the ground. And then I saw it, wooden boards covering what looked like a window, a stained glass window, the kind you'd see in a church. I stared at it, my heart pounding. It couldn't be, right? But it was. The golden orb, the shingles, the roof, I'd uncovered. It was a church, a whole church, buried under my backyard. And then I heard my stepdad's voice calling me in for bed. I didn't answer. I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at the dirt-covered church roof below me, wondering what the hell I'd just uncovered. The moment I slid into bed, I knew sleep wasn't happening. The image of that golden orb, the broken stained glass window, the roof I'd uncovered, I had to go back. Quietly, I slipped out of bed and grabbed my backpack from the corner of the room. I stuffed it with everything I could think of. 2 flashlights, one of them the industrial-grade one my dad kept in the garage. A length of rope, my dad's old combat knife, the one I wasn't supposed to touch, a digital watch, and a crowbar. I figured I'd need something to pry off those boards. I crept down the hallway, careful not to wake my parents, and snuck out the back door. The night was cold. The grass was damp beneath my feet. The backyard stretched out before me, dark and silent, but all I could think about was what was waiting for me beneath the surface. The hole was deeper now, about 14 feet, deeper than I'd ever gotten. I tied the rope around a sturdy tree trunk and fastened the other end around my waist. With both flashlights on, I climbed down, feeling the rough dirt walls closing in on me as I descended. I reached the bottom and pried at the boards with the hammer. The nails were long and the wood was surprisingly strong, but the boards eventually came free, and I found myself staring into the dark void of the church attic. The air that drifted up smelled stale, rotten, like something had been festering down there for years. I dropped down. The attic was cramped, filled with debris, but it wasn't just junk. There were old crosses, some bent and twisted, as if they'd been melted. Dusty hymnals lay scattered across the floor, their pages torn and scribbled with what looked like handwriting, but in not any language I recognized, and in something that looked like dried blood. Some of the wooden pews were stacked haphazardly against the walls, warped beyond recognition. It was like the place had been forgotten and then twisted by something dark. The beams above me sagged, barely holding up the weight of the earth above. And then there were the statues. Saints, maybe. They stood in the corners, their faces chipped and cracked and distorted in unsettling ways. At the far end of the room, I spotted a small drop-down staircase embedded in the floor. It looked ancient, the wood rotted and splintered. I crouched and pulled the latch, lowering it slowly. Below, I could see the faint outline of a hallway. I descended into the hall, my footsteps barely a whisper on the creaky floorboards. The hallway was narrow, claustrophobic. Faded wallpaper peeled off the walls in strips, and the smell, thick, musty like wet earth, was stronger down here. My flashlight beam flickered over the floor, and I froze. There was a hole, a gaping hole that dropped down into blackness, like the earth had swallowed part of the building. I caught myself just in time, stepping around the edge cautiously. Ahead, a staircase beckoned at the end of the hall. I reached it and realized the rope had pulled tight, no more slack. I untied it from my waist and left it there, taking note of the distance. The stairs creaked as I descended, opening up into what had once been the main room of the church. My flashlight swept across rows of old pews, all facing forward, but not in neat lines anymore. They were scattered, some overturned, others half broken, as if something violent had ripped through here long ago. Dead candles sat in iron holders, the wax long dried, and scattered across the floor were torn pages of Bibles. Some of the pages were marked with strange symbols, almost like runes. One symbol appeared on the floor, etched deep in stone, a large circular glyph. And as I stepped near it, I realized it was cracked, like something had broken through. I stepped forward, my footfalls echoing in the silence, and the sound felt wrong, like I was intruding on something that wasn't meant for me. The altar was still intact, but the crucifix that hung above it was upside down, its wood splintered at the base. And then I saw the doorway. At the back of the room, half hidden in shadow, it led to a staircase going down. I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity won out. The basement was made up of a kitchen, though everything was old, rusted. The countertops were littered with dirty dishes, long dried and cracked. A recreation room was next, but the furniture was overturned, broken. A chalkboard in the Sunday school room had childish drawings still scrawled on it, but they were smeared like something or someone had clawed at them in a panic. Finally, I moved into the back room. It was small, tucked away like a secret. The door was heavier than the others, reinforced. When I pushed it open, the stench hit me like a wall. I gagged, my flashlight shaking as I pointed it inside. There, in the corner, was a single chair, wooden, old, and strapped to it was a body, or what was left of one. The corpse had been there for a long time, mummified almost, the skin pulled tight over the bones, the mouth frozen in a silent scream.
The wrists and ankles were bound to the chair with thick, rusted chains, and something had been carved into the chest, deep. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." Above it, painted on the wall in what looked like dried blood, were more words. "We couldn't kill him. We buried him." I froze in the doorway, staring at the body strapped to the chair, the bloody inscription carved in its chest. The words on the wall loomed above it like a threat. But the stench in the room wasn't just coming from here. It was stronger, more putrid, coming from somewhere else. I turned my flashlight toward a side door I hadn't noticed before. The hinges were rusted, and the door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside was another small room, dim and cramped. Hanging in the middle of the room, from a thick rope tied to an overhead beam, was a priest, or what was left of him. His body swayed slightly in the stagnant air, his robes tattered and soaked with dried blood. His jaw had been split down the center, like an axe had cleaved it in two, leaving his mouth grotesquely wide open, the split halves dangling unnaturally. His eyes were open, bloodshot, empty, staring into nothing. I wanted to turn away, to bolt, but I couldn't. Something about him held me in place. And then he moved. It started with a twitch, just a subtle shake of his head, the kind you'd miss if you weren't looking closely. But then his entire body jerked violently. His bloodshot eyes snapped to mine, wide, terrifying, alive. I stepped back, and my heel clicked against something metal. A journal. I picked it up instinctively and flipped through torn, rotten pages. One read, "He preached blasphemy. He said the devil would return through him. We hanged him. We buried the church. We tried to seal the curse, but it never died." His bloodshot eyes snapped to mine, wide, terrifying, alive. I stepped back and my heel clicked against something metal, a journal. I picked it up instinctively and flipped through torn, rotten pages. One read, "He preached blasphemy. He said the devil would return through him. We hanged him. We buried the church. We tried to seal the curse, but it never died." The priest let out a guttural screech and swung toward me, his bloody hands reaching out, splitting the air. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet, and scrambled out of the room.
I barely made it to the stairs when I heard it, the rope snapping. The sickening thud of his body hitting the ground followed. I bolted up the stairs, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the walls. Behind me, I heard the priest scrambling after me, its screeches echoing through the church. My chest heaved, my legs burned, but I didn't stop. I reached the first floor and made a beeline for the next staircase. As I climbed, the sound of splintering wood below told me the priest was in full pursuit. I burst onto the second floor, sprinting down the hallway toward the attic pull-down stairs. Then it screeched again, louder, closer. I glanced back for just a second, but it was long enough. My foot hit nothing but air. The floor. I'd forgotten about the hole in the floor. My stomach dropped as the rest of my body followed. I crashed through the gap, plummeting past the first floor and into the darkness of the basement rec room. I landed hard on an old couch and had the wind taken completely out of me. I rolled off the couch, gasping, forcing my legs to move despite the pain. The room spun as I stumbled into the kitchen. I dropped behind the fridge, curling into the smallest space I could manage, my breaths shallow, desperate to stay silent. The church went quiet, dead silent. I stayed frozen, gripping the flashlight in one hand and the crowbar in the other. My knuckles ached from how tightly I held them. Every second felt like an eternity. Then faintly, I heard it. Footsteps. They thud out somewhere above me, slow, deliberate. Then a screech in the distance. Then the creak of stairs, the sound of weight pressing into ancient wood. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. Somewhere in the church, the priest moved. I could hear faint, deliberate footsteps, the creak of ancient wood under its weight. It was hunting me. I knew what I had to do, but the thought of moving, of making a sound, sent shivers down my spine. I tightened my grip on the crowbar and stepped out into the kitchen, every muscle tensed. The air was heavier now, like the church itself was breathing. I crept forward, each step a careful calculation. The flashlight's beam flickered over peeling wallpaper and scattered debris. And then I turned a corner and froze. There it was. The priest stood just 4 feet away, its split face grotesque and slack, its bloodshot eyes wide and locked onto mine. It tilted its head, the halves of its jaw swaying slightly, and then it screeched, a sound that made my stomach lurch. I didn't think. I turned and ran. My legs burned as I sprinted down the hall and up the stairs, its guttural screeches echoing behind me. I could hear it, clawing at the walls, its feet pounding the floor in pursuit. I crossed the room and scrambled up the stairs, the attic pull-down stairs in sight. But the priest was right behind me. I climbed up, pulling the attic door shut behind me, just as the priest slammed into it. I held it down with all my weight, but its claws tore into the wood, splintering. I crawled backward, gasping, as it punched through the hatch. Its split face appeared, eyes wild and locked onto me, its body convulsing with rage. I turned and bolted for the attic window. The window was small, but I shoved it open and crawled out into the dirt wall of the hole. The air hit me, cold and damp, as I pulled myself upward, hand over hand, using the rope tied to the tree. But behind me, the priest screeched again. The rope went taut. I looked down, heart sinking. The priest was pulling itself up, clawing at the rope, its bloodied hands jerking it higher. I heard it crawling toward the window. Its gurgling breaths were closer now, almost at my back. I clawed my way to the second section of the hole, adrenaline surging. The moment I reached it, I grabbed the shovel from the side of the pit and started hacking at the edges of the hole. Large chunks of dirt and rock crumbled, cascading downward toward the window. My hands burned, but I didn't stop. The priest's screeching grew louder. I turned for just a second and saw it burst out of the window, its bloodshot eyes locking onto mine. It lunged upward, its claws reaching for me. It grabbed my ankle. I screamed, slamming the shovel into its arm, once, twice, a third time. Bone cracked. Its grip loosened. And then the hole gave way. The entire lower section collapsed in on itself, filling the window and burying the attic beneath tons of dirt. The priest's screech cut off abruptly, muffled by the earth. I stood there, panting, staring at the rope, one end still trailing into the dirt where the church had been. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my dad's combat knife and cut the rope, severing the connection between the surface and whatever was buried below. The remaining rope dangled down, tied to the tree above me. I grabbed it and climbed out of the pit, my hands raw and trembling. The hole yawned below me, but I didn't stop. I had to finish it. I spent the rest of the night dragging dirt back from the woods, shoveling it into the pit. My arms ached, my body screamed for rest, but I kept going. By the time the first light of dawn broke over the trees, the hole was gone. Just a patch of freshly turned earth remained. I stumbled inside, covered in dirt and sweat. I took a long, scalding shower, scrubbing the grime off my skin. My reflection in the mirror didn't look like me. It was pale, hollow-eyed, haunted. Downstairs, my mom looked up from her coffee. "Oh, you're up early," she said, smiling. I nodded, sitting at the table. My dad rustled his newspaper, oblivious. Outside, the backyard was quiet, peaceful. But deep below the earth, something ancient had stirred. And I knew, in my gut, that it wasn't over.
Still breathing? If you made it through that, you're braver than most. But what would you do if you found a church buried beneath your backyard? Tell me in the comments, because I read every terrifying theory you leave behind. And hey, if you enjoyed this descent into darkness, hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and share with someone who thinks they've seen true horror. More stories like this every single week, only here on A Beer's Stories. See you in the dark.